Verdi.
Mark Verdi, your
Yes.
rank?
Civilian.
Well,
Used
no,
to be
wait.
retired lieutenant colonel.
Lieutenant. And you served what
From
years?
1988 to 2016.
Okay. What kind of vehicles did you drove? Did you drive?
Well, I did a variety of things. As lieutenant colonel, I didn't get to drive anything, but as a young soldier, I drove tanks, I loaded. My first actual job was a gunner in an M1A2 SEP, and then after I went to OCS, I went on to command 4 tanks when I was a lieutenant, and then more tanks later. And we were on M1A ones at that time, and then we traded those in for M1A1 HAs, which you really can't tell the difference unless you have a Geiger counter, but they're heavier. And then I went on to less exciting things.
And what theaters were you in?
In Iraq and then in Afghanistan.
Great, thank you.
Not a problem. And stuff, and had my time out there, and so I was asked to share some of the things that some of us may use to understand how things really are, and in this way help to craft better, more accurate miniature representations of reality, which is basically what we do in modeling. Right here, since I was on M1s, I'm going to talk about that. However, the ideas will apply equally to all modern U.S. equipment and most NATO equipment, as they use similar technologies and stuff like that. Okay, so these are the things I'm going to try to cover. I may go a little quicker because I don't have much time, and I could talk for 3 weeks on this and not say the same thing twice. So these are the things I'm going to be looking at, and if you don't know what it is, I'll tell you when we get there. But first, let's talk about the 2 primary paint schemes that our vehicles are wearing. Now there's some one-offs and stuff. You go to a little weird place and they may put some. When you go to Fort Irwin, their vehicles are kind of like that, but then they got some other stuff on it. Those happen, but by and large, when you look at the fleet, you're going to be in A or B. This is the 3-color NATO camouflage, and if you've never paid attention, all of the NATO tanks have the same color splotches in the same place. The idea being that the poor Russian soldier who currently is finding out that they don't know what ends up would not be able to say if that was an M1, a Leopard, a Leclerc, whatever. All the spots and all the solid colors are the same in the same places. In the front, it's always going to be black in that area, and it pretty much translates across. They're standard colors. They're available from a variety of things. To me, it has special NATO colors that do a respectable job. Then with the more, from Desert Storm on, this became kind of a standard. That's our desert scheme. That one's kind of pretty well worn, but it's been different shades of tan throughout time since. Okay. Now about the paint itself. The paint that they put on there is super toxic, so you don't want to be breathing anywhere near it when they put it on. Those guys are like really, really dressed up when they go to put it on, and it's usually only a depot level thing where they're changing the colors or putting it back on again. But we refer to what's put on it as carp paint, and this stuff is, I believe it has a polymer built into the paint itself, and the idea is that if you get chemmed, a nerve agent gets dropped on you, and provided you survive the event, when you go to decontaminate your vehicle so you don't poison everybody you come in contact with, they can put some really, really, really harsh stuff on there that basically you don't want to get that on you at all, or you'll be like looking like Indiana Jones at the end there when those people melted. It's pretty serious, but the paint would still be there. It's kind of got, like I said, a polymer built into it to where it can take a whole lot of harsh treatment. And so they're not going to tend to physically rust on the outside unless there is physical battle damage, enough to deform the metal or something, then maybe a little bit, okay? Okay, so let's go over the main variants real quick. Life started way back there with the XM1, got a little bit modified and ended up with the M1. You can tell an M1. I might not even add that as an even M1. Clearly, I wasn't seeing clearly last night. Hard to find pictures of them, but it will have the 105 millimeter main gun, and it'll have no bustle rack on it. Most of them were living in Europe. Along the way, they decided they wanted to upgun to the German 120 millimeter smoothbore cannon, and so we had a variant, not very many copies of it, but enough that I ran into one at Fort Hood on display at the First Cav Museum, and it has a 120 millimeter main gun, but basically it's an old style straight M1 with a big gun in it. Okay, you can tell that because the mantle, that's the part that the shield around where the gun would pivot and where the gun sticks out, will stick out significantly because the M1's armor itself was quite a few inches thinner than the M1A1. Then they liked the gun, they liked the balance, it worked, however, they needed more armor. So before we were ready to start outfitting a fleet with big guns, we had the M1IP, which is the first one I was using when I was a young soldier. It looks like an M1. It's got that same thin, long metal bore evacuator, which I'll explain in a minute. But it's got the little short square sponson box. That's the little kind of like a little trunk on the side where you put stuff. And it does have a bustle rack, which is an extension off the back of the turret to store things in. The soldier's personal gear and whatnot. And so those are some of the key characteristics. The armor is thicker. In fact, if you stand on top of an M1IP, you'll see a weld line about this far from the front where that's extra stuff put on from the original M1 tanks. Then, of course, we evolved up to the M1A1. This is the first tank that had the improved armor, but had the 120 millimeter main gun made many copies. And I know some people, what's the difference between him and him? This one has a blank. It looked like basically a manhole cover over where the future Commander's Independent Thermal Viewer would go. This is the one that won the first Gulf War, did tremendous, a lot of stories, a lot of articles, a lot of battles, and a lot of Iraqis not around to talk about it. Very capable, and I spent many years playing with those. After that, we evolved up and said, okay, we got a winning platform here. What can we do to make it better? And we have some internal changes, but externally, the biggest thing you'll notice on an M1A2 is kind of a big can-looking thing sitting on top there, and that's the Commander's Independent Thermal Viewer. This gave the tank the ability to the main gun. The gunner is fighting the main gun, and the commander's already looking for what's next. And it can pivot around, and if need be, if the main sight is damaged, it can flip a switch, and the gun will point to where the independent thermal viewer is pointing. So that's the biggest external change. Internally, they were upgrading electronics as they go, making things more efficient and so forth. And this one, the second Gulf War, is mostly M1A2s. We had a couple of small improvements in between, but there weren't a lot of external changes that you can really set aside. The M1A1, or the M1A2 SEP, the first SEP tank, System Improvement Package, it had a couple of, it had a radio call box on the back, so if the infantry are running along with you, they can open up the phone and say, hey, there's a bad guy over there, and okay, no more bad guy, and they move on. Then we had the M1A2 SEP V2. With our experience with a low-intensity conflict, we needed the commander being exposed like they are on the A2 there. They wanted him to be able to fire from inside, so unlike other countries where they just sort of had a little joystick and hoped they were shooting, no, you got a thermal sight and all kinds of stuff to where that sight is almost as good as the main gun sight. Operating your 50 with many rounds of ammunition. It's not a little ammo can. So you could go out there and take care of quite a bit of business. It's got these little armored ears on the side to protect the mechanism itself. However, it really sticks up far.
Is that a
We're-
7.62 or 50?
No, that's a 50. I mean, it's probably designed to where you can put small machine guns if you want to, but usually people keep the 50 because that can take care of anything short of a main battle tank, or at least make them reconsider. And then finally we have this M1A2 SEP V2, and they got this idea, except they managed to greatly reduce the remote 50 caliber weapon. The platform was shrunk down quite a bit, and so we have that. And also along the way, there's electronic things inside that have been improved. The thing will basically call home if it needs an oil change and things like that. It's good stuff, but from the modeler's point of view, we really can't model that. Okay, so from the ground up, tracks. Early versions had the T156. This was a solid block, metal inside, coated in rubber, vulcanized on it. It was a pretty tough thing. And the backside smooth, and the front side had cleats, with the thought being that, give you a little bit of traction. Okay, so, and they have a definite direction. So if you're going to build an M1, an M1 IP, or even an early A2, it would have 156 track. Then we decided that we wanted the track to be a little more durable, and so we came up with the 158. Some people called it the Bigfoot because it had big rubber pads that could be replaced, because that's the point of wear, especially when you're driving on the road. And it's a metal interior, and on this face, on the outer face, you have basically a place, and then in it you put this big rubber shoe. When you look at it from this side, the road wheel side is just a big block of rubber with a little cutout to where you put that one bolt, and then the shoe sort of pivots in, and then you bolt it down. All the characteristics of the track is they have 2 pins on either end with a center guide to help hold it together in the middle, and then the end parts are end connectors. And on US tanks, the end connectors, when the track's on the ground, the end connector, the bolt that holds there's a wedge bolt, and then there's a wedge nut and a bolt. The nut is inside, and it wedges up onto 2 flat surfaces on the pins, and then there's a 30 millimeter bolt that you crank down incredibly hard because you don't want them to fall off. And that faces up. If you've ever seen German tanks, theirs face downward. So when the track's about in this position, they're lifting up, doing the same thing. So if you're modeling things, just be aware of the pictures and which way the tracks go. The center guides, the old style center guides were forked. I had one sitting at home, and like a big dummy, I walked out without it. So in the future, I'll drag it in. Then they came up with a solid blade, and then finally they had a cutout there trying to save a couple ounces, I guess. And that's the high points and the low points of the track. Next, we'll talk about the suspension. The suspension holds the vehicle off the ground and keeps it on the tracks. We have 7 axles on each side with a pair of road wheels on each axle. The idler, this is the wheel that sort of moves back and forth and keeps the tension on the track to keep it from falling off. And it has the same diameter, the exact same sort of road wheels. Just for logistics purposes, it makes sense that we only got one kind. We don't have to get the special little one for the idler wheel like some other countries do. And so it makes sense. This is a picture of a M1 hull at the factory before we put any skirts on. So there's a total of 32 road wheels. There are 7 rotary shocks, which you have to really be getting into it, and since the skirts are 99% of the time closed, you don't see it, but there's a rotary shock on road arm number 1, number 2, and number 7, and that just sort of helps dampen the effects of going over rough terrain, gives you a smoother platform to fire from. In the back, we have a sprocket. There's the hub. The hub has 4 cutouts. And when you're in a muddy terrain, these things make, we sometimes jokingly refer to them as tank turds, because you're going through, the mud gets up there and it squirts out like it's coming out of a frosting gun, and they're just, it's dirt colored, so hence the name, and they just sort of fall out on the ground. You see that most of the stuff still comes with green and they just paint it over tan. The sprockets are put onto the hub, and the hub is incredibly heavy. Got one of these on the boat, on the back of both sides. Here's just a picture going up the side of the tank without skirts, which is kind of a rare
2
picture.
minutes.
You see, 2 minutes left?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we aren't going to get far. And then on this side, this is just a kind of a ground view of one that has extra armor on it already. The suspension, okay, the next one. Skirts. The skirts on the left side of the tank, the first two are ballistic, meaning that they're just not little pieces of steel. There's something to them, but what that something is not to be discussed. And on the right side, there's the first 5 skirts are, because there's some hull ammunition storage, and so that's to protect that ammunition a bit. Here's a picture of one of the front skirts from a museum piece, hence the kind of little bit of rust, and then this is on the other side. And you see that they're quite a thick deal. On top of the skirts, you have a rubber piece that goes from the skirt to the hull that keeps the dust down on the inside, and then it's held in place by a metal strip with a series of 3/4 inch bolts. And I'll go 1 or 2 more and then we'll call it quits, and if we want to have the rest of it, we can do that on a different day. The front of the hull. Front of the hull is very flat. Okay, you got basically from here to here is all a box of special armor. Special being it's just not solid, but it's more effective than solid. The driver sits kind of central under the main gun when it's forward, and there's a fuel cap on each side. These 2 fuel tanks are less used than the rear ones. You actually have to pump the fuel from the fuel tank to the rear one to use it. So it's there and has some other purposes, but it's there, and if you need it, you transfer it back and you let them know that you did it. There's 2 torsion springs that holds weak aluminum mud guards on the front. These are oftentimes bent up and tore up because it's just there to keep dust and dirt down. It's kind of for looks. There's 2 headlights. They're either white or you can put blackout lenses in, but you have to physically take it off and put them in. So they're either white or black. There's not one of each, like some older vehicles. And they both are oriented the same way. So as you look at this guy, you see that the blackout drive, the little thing to the right, that has just a very faint light for the driver to use at night when he's got his vision scope in, his night scope in, and then the main ones are for when you're on roads and stuff like that. Question?
Are they lifting the turret out of that?
Yeah, that's probably depot level maintenance. That's not a common thing. That's something special. Let's see, 1 or 2 more and then we're at it. We're done. So, okay, this is just a front shot of the overall face of the driver. Your 2 fuel fillers. The lighter color paints tend to show fuel spills, but the front has fewer fuel spills because a lot of times they just don't use that fuel. Okay, you have 4 places to secure the vehicle, and you just have standard shackles on there. That's the front end. And I think there's 1 or 2 of the back, and we'll just finish with the hull. Okay, fuel. There's 2 fuel caps on the back, 1 in each corner. When you have a fuel spill, this is where it's going to be, and it tends to come out and down. These 2 fuel entrances go to the same fuel tank. So if you're at an angle, you got to watch out. You want to fill it on the lower side. If you fill it on the upper side, it's just going to be coming down the lower side, and then the poor support platoon guys are going to curse you forever as they have to dig up half the planet and take it to contaminated soil. But there he is, fueling it up. It's high pressure. It's kind of a 2-hand affair because when that comes out, it's coming out a lot of fuel a minute. I mean, like a fire hose. There's a variety of screens. The air intakes are here. This is just for air circulation. And then on the back side, there's some more equipment that needs air. There's one big plate. This is not the greatest view, but there's one big plate that starts here and goes over the whole back deck. And when they need to get the engine out of there, they open these two doors, open these, open those, and there's there, and there. They have little lifting rings that hook up, and there's a couple bolts later, it's on the ground, and you got access to the engine. You can see these guys are in quite muddy terrain, and you see the patterns that it flows. The sides, not so much so. The back, lots so. I think we got about one or two more, and we're done with the hull. Okay. How about we put a pause in here, and we can pick this up. Say again? We can do this in whenever we want.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, absolutely. Just let me know.
Mark, what are the top 3 things that you see the modelers get wrong on modern tanks like this?
A lot the weathering. If you're in muddy terrain, it's going to be splattered with mud. When you're in dusty terrain, it tends to be dusty on top, but not so much on the sides. A lot of people like a lot of rust, but the truth is, if it's in active service, it's not going to have a lot of rust. If you're in a desert environment, there aren't going to be any rust on your tracks because the sand acts as like toothpaste, and it's just constantly grinding away. On the end connectors on the side that faces out, you get a little more weathering because that's not directly touching things, but all the parts of the track, especially where the sprocket touches, that's all very, 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 very shiny.
Save on the hairspray.
Yep. Other parts, you know, if you want to model the Ukraine, I guess it's a little muddier over there, but either there's going to be a ton of mud or it's not going to be that bad. So a lot of people go a little hog wild with their rust. Not so much, especially if it's one of ours. Unless it burned or unless it was physically damaged by impact of some sort, such as running over a car or something like that. It's going to look pretty good. It may be dirty, but it's not going to be rusted.
What's the protection on top of the turf? Is it
Not as much as it could be, and
projectiles
with things coming on top of you, I would not be surprised if the A5 or the A6 doesn't end up having explosive tiles on the roof. But as of right now, not too many. Our things do that, but they haven't figured it out yet.
excellent?
Thank you.